Hi, so this video I'm working on GT500. I got some brake noises coming out of this thing and got some squealing noises, and possibly might have some metal on metal. So I'm going to go ahead and replace these rotors and the pads on my 08 GT500. First thing I'm going to do is get this thing up in the air. I'm going to use some jack stands to hold it and put some wheel chocks in the back so we can get a better look at see what's going on underneath here. I got my wheel off of here. I got my car on jack stands, and I want to talk about rotors and basically some inspection points here. So when you're inspecting your rotors, obviously you can check for any cracks, but one way you can tell how much worn in these rotors are is if it's got a lip on the end of it. This is where the pad, the friction area is going to be right in between this area, so it's going to have a lip on the bottom side and a lip on the top side. That's a good indicator. If you got a pretty good size lip on there, that's a good indicator that these rotors are getting worn down. Another inspection point on these brake systems is going to be the friction material on the pad itself. Here you can see the backing plate, and I usually recommend that if you see the friction material at around the same thickness or less than the backing plate, then these pads are candidate for being replaced. And you can see here that this pad thickness is about the same, maybe a little bit less than the backing plate on this on the pad, but again, the brakes were starting to make noise, and I possibly might have some metal on metal on the passenger side. Not sure yet, maybe just a little bit. Could be the wear indicator. We'll find out when I get that taken apart, but either way, I'm going to go ahead and replace both the rotors and the pads on this car. Getting a look at the backside here, brakes are not overly complicated. There's usually only maybe 2 or 4 bolts holding the caliper in place and possibly a caliper bracket, but a lot of people don't like doing their brakes for some reason, maybe because it's kind of a dirty job. But as you can see on this one, we got 2 bolts, 2 caliper bolts holding this thing in here, and those are 15 millimeter, and I got a 1/2 inch breaker bar right here that I'm going to use to hopefully get those things broken loose, and then we can take the caliper off. These are usually torqued to upwards of 100 foot-pounds. That's if the previous mechanic used a torque wrench on them. A lot of times people just tighten them just really tight just to make sure that they don't get loose. Alright, those were not very tight at all, so I'm going to go ahead and get them the rest of the way out of here. Now that I got the 2 caliper bolts loose, go ahead and move this caliper. Remember, there is a lip on this rotor, a pretty good size one, so I'm gonna have to kind of pry this out. What that is the pads are sitting inside there, and I'm gonna have to get the pads to kind of go back in to go back around the lip on the rotor. Okay, so I prefer not to let my calipers dangle from the hoses, so I just kind of put that up over the top here. Now I'm going to see if this rotor will come off. Sometimes these things don't like to come off. I'll spray some PB Blaster in there. But looking at this thing, I can see like there was some overspray from the red. So these rotors have been on there since whoever painted this caliper red. Let's see if these things just come off. And of course they're not going to. Rotors are usually going to need a tap or two, but before I get started on banging on this thing, I'm going to go ahead and just put some PB Blaster on there. I'm going to spray it into the wheel stud holes and also around the center portion of it. I'm going to start off with a dead blow plastic hammer, see if that thing gets this loose. And of course it looks like it didn't even budge, so I'm going to go ahead and go to the other side and pull the wheel off and go ahead and spray down the studs and let that soak in, so that when I move over to the other side, the PB Blaster's had a chance. Then I'm going to come back here and hit this with a little harder hammer. Okay, so I got a bigger hammer here. Hopefully I can just kind of tap this thing off of here. I'm going to try and tap it from the sides. If not, some good hits in between these wheel studs. That'll kind of help break free any kind of corrosion or anything that's inside here. But I'm going to try on the outside first, and I'm going to move on to the inside. When you are hitting the inside of this thing, I'm going to rotate the rotor around and kind of hit in between each one of these wheel studs. But you want to be careful and not hit the actual wheel studs itself, and you could damage the threads. I may put the wheel lug nuts back on here just to protect them. We'll see how hard it is to come off. Alright, so that wasn't too bad. Now the rotor is loose, it just slides right off. While the rotor is off, I'm going to go ahead and use a green scrub pad. And I want to scrub anywhere where the rotor is going to be making contact, just to kind of make sure that that corrosion doesn't, get any worse, and that makes it more difficult to get the rotor off again in the future. So I'll clean up this area and up and around this little lip right here. Alright, I got my hub all cleaned up. I don't put anti-seize on here. Some people will put anti-seize just to help in the future to get the rotor back off. If you do put anti-seize on here, just put a little bit, just like a light coat on here. The reason why I say that is I don't want that like flinging up and getting on my friction surface in between my pad and my rotor. For rotors, I went with stock style, so these aren't going to be slotted or cross drilled or anything. And the reason why I did that is every time I go to the track, I see guys using just standard style replacement rotors, because I think because it's a pretty good wear item. If you're going to the track, you're going to be wearing these out, and the pads I think are going to be what gives you the better stopping ability. So I got some good hawk pads that I'm going to put on here, but these rotors are WBR part number 7R3Z1125-alpha. They are supposed to be coated, so they're not the cheapest rotors out there. So here's the new rotor. Just want to compare it, make sure it's the right size. I have gotten the wrong size rotor before when I order from some online companies. But this looks good, so I'm gonna go ahead and throw it on the car. Before I put my caliper back on there, I was gonna try to spread those pads back out, basically push the pistons in, because the pads on this fixed type caliper come out the top of this thing. So I was going to push the pads in, then put the caliper on there, and then pull the pads out, put the new pads on there. The problem is my tool doesn't fit in between there, in between the pads. And so I could take a pad out, but it's going to be kind of a pain to get the pins out with this thing sitting up here. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this rotor back off, take this rotor back off, and then put this caliper back on without it, so I can knock the pins out, get at least one of the pads out. That way I can get my tool in there and back those pistons back out. And so my caliper is back on now. Basically I need to get these two pins out. They come out, I hit them from the outside in, and then this spring will come off, and then the pads will come out. So I got my little punch, and this is basically the calipers on here, just with the bolts on it, hand tied, just kind of hold it in place so that I can tap these pins out. Okay, my pins are out, my spring's out. Now I'm going to go ahead and take one pad out and put my tool inside there and go ahead and ratchet this thing out so I can get my pistons all the way in. All right, once the tool kind of bottoms out, I don't put a whole lot of pressure on this thing, but you'll feel it because it moves kind of smooth until it gets to the pistons all the way in. Once the pistons are all the way in, then take the tool back out, and we can remove the other pad. Now I'm going to pop this caliper back off, put it up on the top here, get the rotor on, and then get this caliper back on. Caliper is on, no pads in it yet. I got the back two bolts tightened, hand tight. I'm going to go ahead and torque those to 80 foot-pounds. For brake pads, I'm going to use Hawk Performance Ceramic. These are really good. They got good friction. They're going to stop pretty well, and they're going to have low dust. Part number is HB453Z.585. And before you go trying to stick your new pads in there, it's a good idea to kind of compare them, make sure that they're the same size. Also, you note that 2 of the pads are going to have this wear indicator, 2 of the 4. So I like to put the wear indicator on the inside. I'm going to go ahead and put that one on the inside. And the pad with no wear indicator is going to go on the outside. And with the pads in place, I can go ahead and work the pins and the spring back into where they belong. Yeah, last thing I'm going to do is spray it down with some brake cleaner, get any of this packing grease off of here, any fingerprints that I got. It can be difficult to get the back, but just do the best you can. One thing I noticed when I was down here is I got this wire loom hanging down here. I'm pretty sure it's supposed to go back behind this inner fender, but for whatever reason it's on the outside, and I got a little bit of exposed wire right here. So before I put this wheel back on, I'm going to put some electrical tape around any exposed wires, make sure there's no broken wires, and then I'm going to shove this back behind here. Okay, so I got my rotor, I got my pads in, I got my caliper torqued down. I went ahead and put that wire. There was only one exposed wire, so I went ahead and put some black tape around that, and then tucked it up underneath the inner fender well. So that's pretty much it. I'm going to go ahead and repeat this same procedure on the other side. And then lastly, I'm going to take this thing out for a drive. And Hawk has a bedding procedure of a series of braking where they progressively get harder and harder. I'll post that down below in the description section, so that if you put these pads on there, that's what Hawk recommends you doing. It's a series of like 3 to 4 stops from 40 down to 10, let it cool down, drive around a little bit, and then do some more aggressive stops from 45 down to about 20. And then you're basically, what you're doing is you're heating up your pads and your rotors to kind of bed them together. So once I get it all back together, I'll go do that. But this was needed to get done. This car had some worn out rotors. The pads were on the other side. The pads were they're touching the wear indicator. So this is one of the first modifications that I needed to do to this vehicle. Especially if I'm going to put this thing on the track, I'm going to need some good pads. Hawk pads are great for the track and for everyday driving. The performance ceramic pads, I really like them. So thanks for watching. Make sure you subscribe for more Mustang content.